Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. It's Kai, and today I have a video for you all about 3D nail molds. So if you've been around the channel, you'll know that I love doing 3D art, and one of the ways I achieve that is through molds. This video will walk you through the different types of molds, how to clean your molds after use, what kinds of gels you can use with them, and some other fun tips and tricks that I've learned just along the way, having been using them now for probably about 2 years. So if all of that sounds good to you, please consider subscribing for more tutorials and nail hauls. I do all sorts of fun stuff on this channel. But let's get into why I use molds. So I love doing 3D nail art. I generally do a lot of hand sculpting, but I'm fully aware that time is a luxury and not everyone has. So I think molds are a really great way to speed up the process. It allows you to make charms beforehand, especially if you're a nail tech and you have clients who like 3D. It's a really great way to be able to make the charms beforehand and then apply them once they get to the salon. Or if you're doing it in the moment, you can speed up your service. I'm also aware that not everybody is physically capable of working with really small details due to various constraints. And so I think molds are a really great way for everybody to be able to enjoy awesome 3D nail art. And quite honestly, sometimes if a set that I'm working on is really complicated, I do appreciate that I can spend some of the time that I would normally spend hand sculpting on other elements by saving effort with a mold. So now let's look at the different types of molds. You have kind of three main categories. You have flat molds, you have rounded or curved molds, and then you have embossing molds is what I like to call them. Starting with the flat molds, these are the ones that do not have a curved surface. They are just molded into a flat surface. A lot of the ones you see are in this little heart shape here. These are going to be the more shallow, simple shapes, and they do have nice flexibility so that you can remove the final product super easily. Other types of flat molds you might see come in this like square block of silicone. These ones tend to be for the thicker shapes and they have a little bit more body to them, so they're a bit more sturdy. I do personally like these types of molds that come in the blocks. But one thing to note about any sort of flat molds is that these charms, once they come out of the mold, they will sit flat on the nail. They will not have a curve on the back. If you would like a curve, a charm that fits more flush to the nail, you want to look for these molds that have kind of like a curved nail shape embedded in them. Now these are not to actually fit the nail itself or mold the nail itself, but when you put the paint in the mold, it's going to give it a curved back that will sit more flush on the nail. This one is pretty nice because it does curve both lengthwise and widthwise, so you get a really nice 3D charm at the end that will curve perfectly to the surface of the nail. This is another curved mold. This one doesn't have quite as much curve lengthwise, but it does have a really nice curve widthwise, which I personally think is most important. Some nails are longer than others, and so you don't need as much curve lengthwise. So they will have these sort of like straight channels, but you do want to look for one that has a nice widthwise curve. That's just my personal preference. You can make flat molds work as well. It just depends on how you want to use them. But I personally like the curved molds. And the last type are these embossing molds. I'm not sure if there's another name for them, but that's what I tend to call them. They are these flatter silicone molds that are really thin, and they have these really detailed, intricate designs that are meant to be more of a 3D 4D sticker on the nail. You can see that the patterns are really detailed, but there's not a lot of depth to the mold. It's more of a surface level pattern. These ones, in my opinion, are the trickiest to use, but I will give you some tips and tricks throughout the video to make the process a little bit easier. So next, let's talk about which molds I look for and why I use them. I like getting really intricate floral molds because I know that they don't go out of style and I can always get use out of them. I also really like getting molds that have very small, precise details that I know I couldn't sculpt by hand. For instance, these vases are very symmetrical, very geometrical. They have lots of really teeny tiny details that I just know I wouldn't be able to sculpt by hand. Similarly, these frames here are so small, so intricate, and they have tons of really straight lines that you can't really get with hand sculpting. It would be very difficult to achieve this with all of the angles, though maybe not impossible, but again, for me, molds are a great time saver, a great convenience option. I also really like looking for molds with a lot of great texture, things that are difficult to achieve when hand sculpting. For instance, these starfish and shells are super realistic looking. They have a lot of great texture that would be hard to duplicate. And then I do also like getting molds for common shapes that are easy to customize and add your own flair to a set. So these are gemstone molds, which I find super helpful for making my own custom gemstones. I also really recommend like bow molds, flower molds, those sort of things that can be used across all different types of designs that you might just want to have your own custom color for. Similarly, these ring molds are really handy and versatile. I can use them across various designs, and they would be hard to do on their own because they're so symmetrical. So now that we've gone over the different types and what I look for in a mold, a couple other tips when buying. I would highly recommend looking for these molds that come in these plastic cases. This will keep dust, debris, whatever from sticking to your molds when you're not using them. You can buy these cases, just look up bead organizers, bead sorters, but I like the ones that do come with them. It's just handier that way. Now, another thing to look for is the quality of silicone, the type of silicone. As you can see here, the one on the right is much more clear, much more transparent. I would strongly recommend this type over the one on the left, which is much more cloudy. In my personal experience, the clear silicone is more flexible, meaning it's a little bit easier to get the charms out. Also, you can see what you're doing from the back, which is really important for checking for bubbles when you're actually filling the molds. You can then cure from the back as well. I just find that these more clear silicone molds are just easier to work with in general. With the cloudier ones, the problem becomes that, for one, you can't cure from the backside of the mold if it's a particularly thick charm, and you also can't really see if you have bubbles. It's difficult to check if you're actually filling the mold all the way with these thicker, more cloudy silicone molds, so I just recommend check the listing, check for pictures, see if you can find the clear ones. Okay, now let's actually get into how to use these. One of the first steps is making sure you have a nice clean mold. No judgment here, please. This is one of my molds that did not have a case, that was just kind of thrown in the drawer. And you can see how much debris and dust and cat hair it has collected over some time. I find the easiest way to clean these is actually just with some tape. You just rip off a piece and start pressing it into the mold. You can get into all of the grooves with this, and it'll just pick up all of the dust, the debris. Anything stuck to the silicone comes right off with tape. This is probably the most convenient method. It's super simple, but still effective. And you can do this before and after using the mold. So if you have extra gel that you got around the mold, once you cure it, it comes off really easily just with a little bit of tape. And then another tool I would recommend having is actually just one of these lint rollers. You can find this at the pet section of any store, and they're just perfect for getting the surface of the nail molds really quickly. I actually use it for my silicone mats as well. Okay, so now let's talk about filling the molds and what kinds of gels that you can use. There are a variety of different types as well as actual resin that you can buy for mold filling. I personally have not played around too much with the resins, especially the newer iterations, so I'll just go through the nail products that I personally use. The first one being Polygel. So I really like to use Polygel for some of the simpler shapes, especially when I want to do a marble design. I will show you how to do that in a minute. Another type of gel that can be really useful is these like tubed Embo gels. Because they're in a tube, it's really easy to get into the grooves of a mold. Same with if you have like a 3D glue, some sort of thicker gel glue. This IV Fix gel has a really nice small nozzle that can be super useful for getting into those small areas, and it's non-wipe. You can also use builder gels for certain shapes. I would reserve it for the more simple molds. And because they're clear, they can be used for pretty large charms where you might be worried about it carrying all the way through. You can also mix them with colors. Same with any sort of top gel. I do recommend having a thinner top gel that you like that you can mix with colors and use on more complex molds. This is also a really great way to ease up any top coats that you have that maybe you're not the biggest fan of. I also really like using 3D sculpting gels for some situations, particularly the more shallow, simpler shapes. Because of the thicker texture, these are really easy to use and do not involve much cleanup at all. For customizing the color of your charms, I do recommend painting gels. These are going to be super pigmented and thicker so that they don't affect the texture of your gels when you're putting them into the molds. These D-gel painting gels can be mixed in with your clear gel when you go to mold the charm, or you can use them to paint the charm after it comes out of the mold. Same with the painting gels from the MPA art palette. These are great for mixing and painting after, though they are slightly less pigmented than the D-gel painting gels. In terms of tools you can use to actually fill the molds, I highly recommend you get some sort of pointed tool. So this one here I just got from Temu. I will try to remember to look for the link and put it in the description. You can also use the smallest size dotting tool in a set, and that will help you apply the gel into those really teeny tiny corners that might be hard to reach with a brush. And then a liner brush is also a good option. They come in a variety of sizes. So the bigger ones are great for filling in larger areas, while the smaller ones are going to help you get into those really small grooves for those super intricate molds. To help with cleanup after applying the gel and before curing, I actually really recommend scrapers. So you can get these scrapers for stamping plates. They're just like either plastic cards or silicone cards. I like these really thin ones here with the handles if you can find them. Silicone tools are also going to be really useful for cleanup and helping just like push all of that gel into the right place. So now that we've looked at all of the tools and supplies, let's actually get to filling some molds, starting with 3D clay. So I'm going to use the Cristania clays. These are some of my favorite for sculpting. They're super thick, almost like a Play-Doh texture. And so I just start by kneading it to soften it a little bit and then pushing that clay into the mold. Here I'm just using a metal spatula to help with that process. Now I do not recommend using 3D clay for anything more complex than say this shape here. You can see from the backside I'm checking for bubbles, making sure that all of the space is filled. If your mold is too complex, the 3D clay will not be able to get into all of the grooves. Once it's filled though, I'm just scraping out the extra, doing a little bit of cleanup where I can with a brush, trying to get as much of it as possible out of there, and then I give it a cure fully from both sides. This is another reason it's important to have those clear molds, is because you can flip the charm over, cure it from both sides, 60 seconds each. I personally have done cure tests with this clay, and you can get some pretty thick shapes with it while still having a fully cured center. So just make sure you're testing your gels before if you're going to be 3D molding, especially with the clays. And just as a reminder, always make sure that you are properly protecting yourself, not touching uncured gel, wearing gloves when possible. Just all of the necessary safety things to make sure we can continue doing nails as long as possible. But here I'm just clipping away some of that excess with a cuticle nipper. Just make sure it's a spare one, not one that you use on your cuticles, and we are left with a pretty little custom bow charm. If you notice, even this shape that is somewhat simple had a couple of air pockets where the 3D gel couldn't fully reach. So just make sure that you're using that with the more simple shapes. Even something here like this starfish that's super textured, because the shape overall does not involve a lot of like deep grooves or anything, a 3D gel works perfectly for this. Just press it in. Here I'm just using my finger. You can then scrape away some of the excess with some sort of spatula. And I actually just take a lint-free wipe and wet it with some alcohol. I generally use 90% alcohol, less water to absorb into my products. And then you can actually just wipe right over the surface of the mold. That 3D gel, because it's thicker, is not going to move. And then you don't have any of that extra that you even need to clip away. You can just give your charm a full cure from both sides and pop it out, and it is good to use. You can see that the clay picked up the texture really nicely. I think 3D clays are perfect for these like really shallow textured charms. 3D clays just cut down on the bubbles. Similarly, let's look at Polygel. So I actually used to do extensions with Polygel. I have a lot of it hanging around, but realistically, the only times I use Polygel now is if I want to do a marbled look. Because of its thick texture, Polygel is super easy to mix without over mixing when you're doing a marble. So I'm just taking clear and white, mixing it together on a palette. You could also add some glitter to this, which would be super pretty, some chrome powder for some shimmer. But I scrape up my marbled gel and just press it into a gemstone mold. Polygel, like the 3D clays, really requires a shallow mold. You can't use it with super complicated shapes because it just won't get into all of the grooves. But as with the last mold, I'm just taking some isopropyl alcohol, this time on a brush, and cleaning up the shape, patting that polygel into place in the mold, making sure it's nice and filled and even in all of the corners. And then I'm taking that scraper and just getting rid of some of the excess. And then I'll toss it in my lamp, curing on both sides for a minute. And then you can pop out your custom marble charm. You can see with the polygel that swirling pattern held its shape really nicely. Also, just be really careful. I forgot to check the backside of the mold when I did this one. Make sure that it is fully filled, that there aren't any bubbles that you'll have to fill in later. And because polygel is tacky, you will have to top coat, just keep that in mind. But cleaning up the mold after use is super easy. I'm just taking my lint roller and that just picks up the cured gel from the surface, and you're left with a nice and clean mold ready to use next time. Similar to polygel, you can also use Embo gels to fill your molds. Because of the tube design, it actually makes application super easy. You can kind of spread apart the mold and use the nozzle to get into some of the grooves. Just make sure you're always checking the back to see if you get all of the spaces filled, that you have no bubbles. One way to actually get rid of some of the bubbling is by tapping the mold on a surface. I just kind of like drop it on my desk and redistribute the gel inside the mold. And then if you still have bubbles even after that, you can take a brush, just like a liner brush, and kind of like push that gel into those grooves, into those gaps. And then as much cleanup as you can do before curing, the better. That way you have to cut away less when you demold your charm. So I'm just taking my silicone tool here and trying to get some of that extra gel around the edges. The curved molds are just a little bit harder to clean, but I do like the end results. So after curing on both sides, you can just pop out your charm, do a little bit of that cleanup with a cuticle nipper. Now, with these Embo gels, I would not recommend doing super thick charms in one layer. I would do two. You just want to make sure you're always testing, ensuring that it's curing all the way through. But you're left with a beautiful, flexible charm. So I do like Embo gels because the end result is quite flexible. The Jello ones at least don't cure rock hard. They have a little bit of give to them, which actually is really nice for fitting it to the surface of the nail. So that's just something to consider. And they're non-wipe, so there's no sticky surface to contend with. Another tube gel that I really like to use for these molds is the Ivy Fix gel. I have a love-hate relationship with this. My current iteration of the tube does leak. The product gets on the inside of the tube cap. I think they've updated it since I got this one though, but it has such a small, fine nozzle that I can forgive it. It's super great for applying to these really tiny detailed molds like this. I can get in all those grooves. It is really clear when it cures, and it is non-wipe as well. Though you could use any other gel glue that you have that is small enough to fit into those grooves. I know that some companies sell them with a like little needle nose syringe at the end. I think that would be super useful. And because it's clear, you can do the charms that are a bit thicker with this gel, and you don't have to worry about it getting cured all the way through. The light can penetrate. So before you go out and buy resins, definitely look at what gel glues you might have that are usable. Now, if you want a colored charm, you can actually just use your cream polishes. I'm just using this white one here from Divock. If you're going to use a cream polish, just make sure you're working in layers. Because the polish is opaque, it's not going to cure through a really thick layer. So I start by just painting on a bit into the mold, getting it into the general areas. And then I'll go in with a tool. This one here is just like a dotting type tool. And I'll spread that gel out to have contact with the entire surface of the mold. It's okay if this is not fully filling the mold because it's just our first layer. And then I'm going in with a small brush and some isopropyl alcohol to clean up those edges. Give it a full cure, and then you can go back in with another layer as needed to fill up the rest of the mold. You can use that same tapping method on the desk to help it level out, get rid of bubbles. And once you fully cure it and pull it out, you have a nice pre-colored charm. I personally tend to use white or clear for my charms, that way I can paint them afterward, but you can always go in with a base color of your choice just to cut down on the amount of painting you'll have to do. Syrup gels can also be used to fill molds. I personally use a lot of Japanese Korean products, and I have noticed that syrup gels from the brands that I use in particular have a slightly softer cure to them. They're not like a hard gel that cures without any flexibility. So in this case, I wanted to show a little bit of a maybe what not to do for super delicate molds like this frame here. Using a syrup gel or a softer curing gel might just cause issues with the structural integrity. You'll see here once I fill it and go to cure it, it can be a little bit difficult to remove from the mold because it did cure on the softer side. It's a little bit bendy. So if you want a charm that's going to have a lot of structural integrity, I would maybe not recommend a syrup gel, at least in my experience with the syrup gels that I personally tend to use. Otherwise, it's going to have a lot of flexibility. On the flip side, maybe you want a little bit of flexibility, and in that case, a syrup gel is a good option. Now, if you do want a custom color, but you want more sturdiness, you can go in with some sort of top coat, something that you know cures on the harder side, and mix in a colored painting gel. I just mixed in a little bit of pink from my MPA art palette. I know that there are resin kits that you can get out there that come with like dyes and a mixable resin. I tried it probably a couple years ago when I was getting into 3D molds, and the resin that I had was yellowing super badly, so it was affecting the final outcome of the color. So I haven't delved back into any sort of like resins for 3D molding. If you have any recommendations, definitely drop them in the comments because I'd love to give them a go. For now, I just do my own custom mixes with clear gels and my painting gels, and that seems to work out okay for me. But you can see that our mix here when it comes out of the mold is a lot sturdier and is still slightly flexible just because this mold is so thin in the first place, but it's going to hold its structure a lot better than the previous iteration. So speaking of painting gels, you can actually use your painting gels directly in your mold. As with the cream gels, I would just recommend working in thin layers. But this is a great way to pre-color your charms if you don't want to go in and paint them afterwards. I'm just using a dotting tool here and getting that paint into all of those grooves. Just a thin layer to start, and then I'm cleaning up around the mold with a small brush and that isopropyl alcohol. The more cleanup you can do before curing, the less clipping you will have to do after. And then I'm taking the green and just filling in the leaf areas. Since these painting gels are thicker, they aren't going to mix together, and I can get really nice separate colors for each of the separate components. Whereas if you were using a cream polish, it might end up mixing some around those edges where the leaf and the flower combine. But then I go in with a full cure before going in with a second layer. You may even need to do a third. It really just depends on the depth of the mold. Our goal though is to make sure that everything is nice and fully cured and that you don't have any uncured gel sitting on the surface of your nail. But once you're done, you can pop out the charm and it is already pre-painted. It's good to glue to the nail and you don't have to worry about coloring it afterwards, though of course you still could. Now you may want to paint your charm after it's been molded if it has a lot of really small details that need painted that would be hard to do during the molding process. So here I'm just gonna fill in a pretty complex flower mold just with a liner brush and some milky white polish. This is the Milkist polish from Divock. For something like this with really deep grooves, I do recommend a thinner polish. Like, I would not probably go in with an Embo gel here or something like that, just because it would be difficult to work into all of the grooves. At the same time, a small liner brush is best for filling these sorts of molds. And don't be afraid to manipulate the mold, stretch it out as needed to make sure that you can get inside all of those small detailed areas. That's why they're made out of silicone, is because they're meant to be flexible. So once you have your mold all the way filled and you cure the product, you can remove the charm. Again, it's going to be slightly flexible, at least for me, because I used a syrup gel to ensure that everything would cure all the way through, especially with these more detailed molds. I'm just clipping away the excess here with my nippers, and then I'm going to glue this onto the nail with that same gel we used earlier, the Ivy Fix gel, but any sort of gel glue will do. But once you have it cured in place, it's time to paint it. Now, the type of paint you use is going to be important. So these are two nails I had done previously. The one on the left was using a pretty thin viscosity syrup gel, and you can see that the color is not entirely even over the surface. It pools in some of the grooves. So I would recommend, if you're going to be painting on top of a molded charm, that you actually use a painting gel, something really opaque, something that is not going to pool necessarily in those 3D spaces and cause some areas to be more opaque and some areas to be more see-through. This process, it does take some time, I will admit, but I think the end results are really lovely. It saves you a lot of time in the actual sculpting of the charm itself, and I think you can get some really awesome realistic looking charms this way. So I'm a big fan of post-painting after you've molded charms. But now let's look at some of the other fun things you can do when you customize your own charms when you use molds, starting with embedding things. You can use any sort of thick builder gel, a thick top gel for this process. I'm using the Coulier gels from Jinbei, and I'm just going to fill in a fairly thick layer in the bottom of this ring mold. The stuff's really sticky, so it is a little bit difficult to work with. If you have a thinner consistency, that might work better. This is just what I had on hand. And then I'm going in with some dried flower petals. These ones specifically are from Essmint, and I'm just placing them into that uncured gel, spreading them around the ring, and it gives this really pretty effect of them being suspended and floating. I think it's gorgeous. You could also add in some glitters, some gold foil, whatever you think would look good, even like smaller pearls and charms. And then I'm going in with more of that clear gel and just filling in the rest of the mold. Because this mold is flat, you can then use a scraper just to clean up around the edges, and then use your tiny detailer brushes with some alcohol to get any of the excess out of the center. And once it's all cleaned up, it's back into the lamp to cure from both sides for 30 seconds. Now with builder gel, it is going to have a sticky finish, but I find that a lot of builder gels tend to cure really clear, especially these Coulier gels from Jinbei. So you will need to top coat it, but look at how gorgeous that turned out. I think it's such a stunning effect. Another cool thing you can do with simple 3D molds is actually pre-chrome your charms. So you just take your eyeshadow applicator and you rub it into the inside of the mold. Again, it only really works for these simpler shapes where you can really access all of the surface, because you do want to make sure that you have a good layer of chrome powder in there. If you have extra around the edges on the surface, you can just take that off with some tape or with your lint roller. And then to fill the mold, you do actually need a non-wipe top coat of some sort, or at least a non-wipe gel. I recommend a thin consistency. I really like the Yoga Mayo glass top. It is a thin consistency non-wipe top gel. If you try to use a wipe gel or something that has a tacky layer, the chrome powder is not going to stick right, so just make sure it's non-wipe. But go ahead and fill your mold. If it's clear, you can fill it all in one go. If it's colored, do make sure you do it in layers to cure all the way through. But once it is cured, you can pop it out of the mold, and the charm will just take all of that chrome powder with it, and you have a super nice pre-chromed charm. Now, it's not going to give you the exact mirror-like finish of doing chrome over a non-wipe top coat. It won't be as mirror-like, but it is a really pretty finish and something that you can experiment with. And as always, tape makes it super easy to do a little bit of cleanup and get rid of any of that excess chrome powder. Okay, we are finally on to the last type of mold, and these are what I call embossing molds. They're the really thin, super flexible silicone molds where the pattern is intricate, but it's not super deep. I find these the hardest to use, but I do have some tips and tricks for you. First of all, I would recommend an opaque gel with these. That's the best color payoff that you're gonna get. So I just paint on a thin layer, and then I use a scraper to scrape away the excess, making sure that the design is nicely filled in. And then to make sure the design is super clean, I just swipe once really quickly with a lint-free wipe, wet with a little bit of isopropyl alcohol. Just do this once. You don't want to take away too much of the gel. And then you're going to cure that design and go in with a layer of base coat over the back of the design. This will just keep everything together and allow you to apply it to the nail. Now, all base coats are not created equal. You need a base coat that has a lot of flexibility to it. This one did not. It was more stiff, and you can see that you can't really bend this pattern, so it's going to be very difficult to actually apply it to the nail itself and have it sit seamlessly over the surface. So I'm going to fill the mold again, this time doing a little bit of an ombre gradient. You can apply multiple colors, scrape over them sort of like screen printing, and get some really fun ombres, some nice blends. So I just went with a pink and green here, just applying a little bit of gel on top of the mold and then going over with my scraper and ensuring that the paint gets in all of those grooves. One quick swipe with my lint-free wipe, wet with a little bit of that isopropyl alcohol, and then I will fully cure this under the lamp. A base gel that I really recommend for this technique or for doing like your own hand-painted stickers is the Dayami Feel So Good base. It has a really flexible cure. Any sort of rubber base would probably work. And I wish I had it to show. I couldn't find it, but I've also done this with Mod Podge before. That's a really cheap alternative. But you can see once I've cured that base layer, it still has a lot of give to it. It's super thin, really flexible. And as a plus, it's actually quite sticky, so you can just apply it straight to the nail as is, and it should stay in place. One warning, I would not touch the back of this too much. I would recommend using like tweezers to pull it off of the mold. Otherwise, you'll get the imprint of your glove or any debris that's stuck to your glove on the back of the sticker, and it will just show on the nail. So yeah, recommended using tweezers and touching this as little as possible until you've applied it. But you can see it just sits super nice and flush on the nail. So definitely dig out your rubber bases, see if those work, or if not, Mod Podge is readily available at most craft stores. And don't forget, proper cleanup and storage will improve the life of your silicone molds. There is one more way to use some of these embossing molds. If the design itself is not too complex and it's connected like these little clouds here, these wispy clouds, you can actually use the flexibility of the mold to apply it directly to the nail. So here I'm just filling in the design with the white cream gel. It's going to be the same process as before. Applying the paint, scraping away the excess, wiping it once really quickly with an alcohol wipe. And then you want to just flash cure this briefly. You don't want it to fully harden. You want it to have a little bit of flexibility. So just a quick flash cure. And then on the surface of your nail, use a transfer foil gel or some sort of sticky base coat so that the design has something to cling onto. Give that a full cure. And then you want to make sure the surface of your mold is really clean, so go over it a few times with tape or your lint-free roller. And then you'll take the mold and actually just press it against the surface, that tacky surface that we created with the transfer foil glue or the sticky base, and the design should come right out. If it's not laying flat on the surface, you can just kind of like press it into place. You might need to apply a little bit of glue. But for the more simple embossing designs, this is a really easy way to attach them to your nail. And with that, we've actually reached the end of this video. I hope that you've learned something. I hope that this helps you with your 3D mold adventures. I am still learning myself, so these are all just tips and tricks that I personally have picked up. I would like to revisit the resins specifically made for nail molds. I think they've probably improved since I last used them, so maybe that's another video in the future. But if you did enjoy this video, please consider subscribing to my channel. I do dedicated guides like this, as well as normal nail art tutorials and more vlog style content. Also check out my discount codes in my link tree below. If you'd like to support me and the channel, I also have a Discord if you would like to chat. But I hope you're having a wonderful day wherever you are, and I will see you all for the next one. Bye.